I love this.
Hey, everybody. I feel like if you was on Women's Wrestling Talk, you just saw us. But we are here finally doing the episode from last week, but also this week's episode of Dark Side of the Ring. And if you aren't aware of what those episodes are, last week was Magnum TA, which I thought was a pretty solid episode. And then this week, which is a little bit more, well, they both were kind of sad, but I feel like this one's a little bit more sadder than, last week. We are talking about the Graham dynasty with Eddie Graham and Mike Graham, which unfortunately didn't have like the best of an end. And so before we kind of break down the episodes, what were your initial thoughts about both episodes?
Well, the one with Magnum TA, I really like that. Just like because I wasn't so like informed on him and just kind of seeing how things went. And man, it sucks how things went out because I actually, think he would have been huger than what he was. Don't play with him. But yeah, no, I definitely liked it. Now the other one is like, oh my goodness, I needed to hold on. Like I needed to hold on to something. Like it was so heavy for me. Like it is very heavy on me mentally, but it was a good episode. It was just a lot. It was very heavy.
Yeah, it definitely was. I feel like I guess we'll get into it when we get there. But definitely, like, I feel like neither one of these episodes was necessarily happy, but the first one wasn't as, like, I mean, it was bad, but not as, like, damn as the one from this week. So I feel like if anything, what I would say is with the Magnum TA episode, it wasn't like he was like doing like violence or there was drugs or any of that stuff. It was just a really unfortunate situation that happened. But I guess we can kind of jump into a little different. So again, this was not as dark as some of previous Dark Side of the Ring episodes. Magnum TA was a top star for Jim Crockett Promotions in the 1980s. And even to the point where many thought he may even be a rival to Hulk Hogan at that time. And if you know anything about wrestling in the 80s, Hulk Hogan was, the thing back then. And so Magnum TA or Terry Allen, was his name, originally worked, he was like Inspire Wrestling working in a bar and tried to break into the wrestling business when he was discovered by a wrestler named Buzz Sawyer, who said he would kind of help him get into the business. And unfortunately, Buzz doing a lot of shenanigans, unfortunately, the carny business that is wrestling. He said he will, if he pay him $10,000, he will help him get a wrestling license. And so, poor Terry got the money from his grandfather. And I just want to know what kind of grandfather you have that can just give you $10,000 because, hello, I will be your grandchild if you need one. But anyway, his grandfather gave him $10,000 and Buzz wound up skipping town. And this was something that also should have been said that back then, wrestling licenses, I'm not sure if there's a difference now as far because I don't run a wrestling promotion or whatever, or nor do I wrestle. But wrestling licenses, particularly in back then, cost between $10 to $25. So he really violated um by telling him that he need $10,000 to help him get a wrestling license, which I thought was kind of shitty. But anyway, Terry was kind of encouraged by Jimmy Garvin, and Terry was able to kind of track down Buzz later on. And even helped Buzz wind up helping him a little bit learning the ropes for wrestling. And so Terry did get the job on wrestling, but never got his $10,000 back, which personally, that would not have flown. I mean, personally, if I give you $10,000 and you think you're going to just show me the ropes after you took my money, you can show me the ropes and then you can be at the bottom of the ropes when I kick your butt. I just feel like we're not playing those kind of games. I don't know why he allowed that. I guess maybe that speaks to him as a person. I'm a nice person, but let's not do bullshit. And so that's kind of where he kind of got his start. And so before I continue, what are your thoughts about that information as far what we learned
He
about.
was dead wrong. How dare you? You know what? See, I'm too petty because somebody would have been in jail. Yeah, somebody would have been in prison. Like me, because 10,000. You got just got 10,000 laying around. You're going to jail. You're going to the big house. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty petty too. And I know Michelle Obama had that quote where it's like, if they go low, you go high. But I'm like, if they go low, you go lower. Sometimes I feel like you have to sometimes go to the floor low because let's not do shenanigans, like $10,000 in the 80s, like, inflation happened. And so like, you're thinking about that, like, I'm just, come on, let's be for real. That's insane. The fact that his grandfather even had that give that to him, because I can't think if I could ask my grandfather, be like, so you got 10,000, he'd be like, you got it, sis. I don't know. I mean, I just don't feel like that's happening, but definitely, definitely would have been a little upset about that. And so, if you haven't noticed, if you think of some of the 80s action TV stars from back then, Magnum TA did resemble Tom Selleck. If you know the show Magnum PI, which I do know, thanks to my mom, I do know Magnum PI. And so he had gotten the name Magnum TA off a reference of Tom Selleck at the time from the 80s show. And he was actually, he credited Andre the Giant for giving him the name, which I thought was a nice little play. He also was inspired by Dusty Rhodes, and God rest Dusty soul, but because I keep thinking about Cody, we mention him every 2 seconds, and I'm just like, I guess. And Dusty was the booker for Championship Wrestling in Florida, and help him kind of get his character in, as far as trying different suits, punk rock jackets, and they kind of settled on the leather jacket and a Harley Davidson motorcycle. And eventually Dusty will introduce Terry to Jim Crockett promotions, where he kind of will start really kind of taking up a little bit. And so he had the look, the thing of the 80s look, 80s wrestling stars. He definitely had the look, had the presence, and definitely could wrestle. And they even said to the point where, like, women would fall over themselves to kind of get his attention, which is like insane to me. And I think there was even a segment where his ex-wife mentioned that there was at a store one time and a female employee at the store, a woman employee, did faint. And I'm just like, okay. I don't
Real.
really know how to feel about that's a bit much. I mean, I liked people before, but I don't think I've fainted from anybody. I feel like that's a bit extreme. But that's what happened. And so I feel like, let me just bring it to you really quick, because I know what you said previously as far as him being that heartthrob, 80s wrestling heartthrob that apparently had all the women weak at the knees.
Girl in the mall, real. She's real. She's real, girl. I would have been right down past out with you. You've been right laid out on the floor too. Yep. It was giving baddie. That's all I can say. Definitely. It was giving. That's it.
Yes, it's unfortunate. Again, wrestling unfortunately can be very carny. And so people sometimes will get scammed and treated unfairly. And I have been fortunate. I don't wrestle, but as far as what I've worked for, I haven't had really any issues with that. Let's hope, fingers crossed, that doesn't happen. But yeah, it was just, I guess them explaining that was kind of funny, because I'm like, really? Okay. I guess if people fit in and stuff, that's a bit much. And so anyway, Terry, or Magnum TA, wound up really getting over with the crowd, which I thought was like really cool to kind of see, and definitely was on the path towards being the main event. He did have a feud with Nikita Koloff, and even there was talks for him to have a feud with Ric Flair for the world title, and even to the point with NWA wanted Magnum TA to kind of be the next world champion. And so he clearly was the real deal. He clearly was the person. Again, if you think of 80s style wrestlers, I know now we have a different, we have a lot of ranges of wrestling now. And I say this in a good way. Like, there's the smaller guys, there's the guys who's more high flying, there's the lucha guys, there's the Japanese style. We have so many different types of wrestling. But you think of American wrestling in the 80s, it was those guys who was like super buff, some of them, if not most, on steroids, with certain hairstyles and the super mustaches and all that other stuff. We knew what to expect. And so he definitely had the look. I'm talking about those police mustaches from the Had all of those. Um, he definitely had a hey, thank you for coming in. We just saw you at WWT. Um, he definitely had the look, and so unfortunately, because like I said, I did appreciate that a lot of this episode did speak to the fact that he actually was somebody who could have really been the next big thing, and we now get to the part, I guess, where it kind of gets a bit sad. Where he has a bit of a car accident, and so they did show the picture of the car. And so on October 14, 1986, and it was clearly before I was born, Magnum TA was driving home from the rain after an event. He had his Porsche 911, and his vehicle kind of, he tried, I guess, to hydroplane in it and lost control. And the car wound up smashing into a telephone pole at high speed, which broke the pole in half and trapped him inside the vehicle. He couldn't move, and the police had to kind of cut the roof off with the jaws of life. Now, if anybody knows what the jaws of life is, I think I've only seen that. Like once, where somebody had to get cut out of a car like that, and I mean in person, and it's because I was stuck on the thing when it happened. But it's a bad when you have to get cut out of the car like that. Yes, y'all know about those 80s mustache. It was like the typical cop mustache where they're probably ready to start some stuff, but they had that mustache right. They had this mustaches right there. And so we got to really see that in him, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, this was before I was born, but I do remember hearing about it as a kid, I believe, as well. So it's unfortunate. Love you too, Shanties. Hey, love you very much. But yeah, this is, where it started to get sad, because I'm like, oh man, that's terrible. And they did show the car. The car was completely a wreck, and I'm honestly surprised that he lived. And so he did need immediate surgery, and they was worried because of the fact that the injury to his spine kind of put some stuff in. Spinal injuries are really funny, and that he was paralyzed from the neck down. They did say that fans, to the point where they had to turn away so many phone calls because the fans were concerned, which I thought was also spoke to him as a wrestler, that they were calling the hospital to check in, and to the point where it was thousands of people calling in, and at the point where they had fans even holding vigils outside of the hospital for him to get better. And a lot of the people at JCP wrestlers were putting a portion of their week so he can have some kind of income. And then Jim Crockett would, match whatever they can contribute. And so I thought, considering all of this, it's kind of unfortunate. And of course, wrestling being wrestling, because you think of all the situations when something really real happens, and then wrestling making it into a storyline, because why wouldn't they? They did make this into a angle, because they said they couldn't have some people visit him because of kayfabe. So Ric Flair, for instance, because they were in the angle, could not come and visit him, and so he had to kind of sneak into the hospital in the middle of the night. And then Bill Apter, I believe he was a wrestling journalist, he was able to come in, and so they did a story on Nikita Koloff, who had a picture of him on a cover saying that he's grown to respect TA Magnum during a feud. And then they said they kind of showed him in the hospital for fans to kind of get behind him for being the next challenger for Ric Flair's title. So before I continue from there, what are your thoughts leading up to this?
Oh my God, I was so sad. No, because it sucks, because it really did, like, just from how they were building him, it really felt like he could have really been something huge. And just for it to be taken away for something so little, it was really heartbreaking, honestly. Yeah, and just like the stuff with them, like, I thought that was so cool of him to do the whole thing of making it into a storyline. Like, I was like, yeah, you're lit for that. Like, hell yeah. Like, I have respect for that, because, he loves the business so much that he was like, you know what? I'm going to, I can't do much right now, but I'm going to do what I can. And that just speaks to him as a professional in this business. Like, he had bigger fish to be frying at that moment, and he still put that as a priority. Like, I have so much respect for him. Like, yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, it definitely was unfortunate that it happened that way. And so eventually Magnum TA will return to NWA at an event in 1987, kind of walking with a cane. And but unfortunately, because of this accident, he would never be able to wrestle again. So he did like non-wrestling roles, which included commentary. But unfortunately, he was not able to wrestle again. And this was I say unfortunately because there as you know how any type of athletic situation, sometimes people do not have a plan B. A lot of times, anybody in kind of sports or anything that requires you to be athletic, they put everything into being this. And so when it's gone, it's like, where do you go from here? And I feel like this is kind of what happened with him, because there was no plan B, not only for him but even for the promotion, who already put all these plans into going behind Magnum TA being the champion. It was all this stuff they were doing, and it was kind of gone now because he couldn't wrestle anymore. And so eventually they did say that, Nikita would challenge Ric Flair for the title. He didn't win it. And then Ron Garvin will take the title in late 1987, but then he'll drop it not so long after that. And so it kind of just said that the company kind of putting everything into Magnum TA, left him with no legitimate options since he could no longer wrestle. And then obviously Jim Crockett Promotions was purchased by Ted Turner and would be named WCW. And we also know what happened with WCW, as we wound up getting also into what is now fully with ECW and WCW as WWE. And so I feel like it was sad for this episode. But not as bad as some of the other episodes. And maybe if, before everything really, if how I want to say this, if they really could have kept, if he didn't get injured or anything, he might have been somebody that could have even went head to head, for all we know, with Vegatus Man during that time, just because of like how like people loved him. Clearly, he had the sex appeal apparently for women. I mean, I don't get it, but I guess because me and Roman is like to the end, and so I get it. See Roman, I'm gonna faint, but I'd be like, you know what? Let me just take a look. You tall glass of something. I'm just saying that. I totally understand it, and so, it's unfortunate though that it really could have been the sky's the limit for him, but it was not that. And so it kind of, him being gone kind of left a hole in Jimmy Crockett Promotions, but it also kind of put a really quick end to what could have been a really fantastic career, especially for somebody during that time. And so that was truly, truly unfortunate. I do agree. I do love a well-spoken person. And it's definitely, like I said, it was sad, but not as sad as some of the other ones where you're like, damn, like, because he's still around, just not able to wrestle anymore. And so that was unfortunate. So what are your, I guess, final thoughts on that?
I'm glad that he was able to find new life and find new things to kind of put his drive into, because I know it must have been, so hard to walk away from that and not have that any longer, especially when it's like at the moment you didn't have a plan B, but he made his own plan B. And clearly he's doing great for himself. He's done a lot of stuff. He has, a wife that he found new love. So I love it, because it's like, it just makes you feel good, because some of these stories end so badly. And while it sucks that things didn't go the way that I'm sure he would have wanted, or many people would have wanted, he still was able to have a life. He's still, around. So I think that that's as great an ending as you can have, and yeah. That was a good episode. I enjoyed it a lot. And his wife's voice is so his ex-wife's voice was so calming. Like, I could listen to her talk all day, actually. She could read me a book to sleep. Okay, well, don't do that. But I'm saying she could if she wanted to.
Now I'm curious about what you want to say, because I'm like, oh. Now I'm curious about what you want to say now. I want to know. But yeah,
well, he was giving baddie. He was giving baddie, though.
It was a lot more. I mean, I'm gonna have to. Those '80s types was not my type. I have a type and it's not them. Mine's fall under the long hair type situations. Like the Roman in the Sean and the Jeff. You see, there's clearly a pattern. Uh that is that is true. That is true. Yeah, that is true. So for me, not doing much, but she like, okay, yes, he definitely is, and we know how. At least I know how I feel about Tessa. I guess people want to be forgiving. But Katrina, just I'm gonna have to side eye people when y'all say racist things. I can't just be like, okay, man, you said sorry. I'm like, are you sorry? I don't know. But in regards to like I said, with it could have been a lot worse. Considering some of these other Dark Side of the Ring episodes where it's like, goddamn. Yeah. That's how that pretty much end. Listen, it is. I mean, it is. It's a fact, though. It's not like he's not. He is. So it is. It is a fact. But at least in this regard, it wasn't as bad as some of the other episodes we've gotten on Dark Side of the Ring. So then let's now move on, because this episode was definitely a lot more heavier into the episode for this week, which was the Graham Dynasty with Eddie Graham and Mike Graham. And so Chris Jericho was narrating, because I felt like he really wasn't the last, unless I completely just ignored his. I might have honestly ignored if he was in the last episode, but he definitely was in this one as far as narrating. The Chris Jericho voice, I knew that off like that. And so Jim Cornette does start the episode talking about the history of champion wrestling from Florida, and how back then during the glory years of that promotion, the Graham family was either behind the scenes or on the wrestling card, and that they kind of drew thousands and thousands of fans and had what was considered Super Bowl ratings in the state. And then we also get to hear from Nicole Bazat, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, who is the daughter of Mike and granddaughter of Eddie. And she kind of talks about how she was brought up a little differently because her different wrestlers would be on her couch. And that Andre the Giant did scare her as a child. I mean, he is a big guy. So I'm like, I guess, I think if I was a little kid, I'd probably be a little bit afraid of Andre as well, because he's a big guy and I'm, I stopped at 5'2". Listen, I totally didn't recall his voice at all in the last one, and that might just been me because I wasn't gonna be honest. His voice is not like, how you just know his voice, and I'm like, I don't know why I didn't remember hearing it, but clearly, yeah. Listen, I just totally didn't. I just totally didn't remember his voice hearing the last one, but yeah. So she talks about how it was like the family business, and Jim Cornette says everybody kind of wanted to work in Florida because not only the weather, the money was good, there was the girls, and it was a chance to learn from Eddie Graham, because he, would make a person believe they were the toughest man in Florida, and they would get some classic FCW footage. And so they also show Kevin Sullivan, who said Eddie was a genius in the business, and said that Eddie's father also died pretty young. And so I kind of think that's kind of set up for how the rest of this episode kind of play. But before I get into more of the episode, what were your thoughts, I guess, as far as the opening part of the episode?
This was so sad. Like, I genuinely, it was so sad. And then just like, I think, you know what? I don't want to say because it sounds terrible. Like, that was a good setup for them to say, oh, he died young, but they didn't specify until the end of the episode. I was like, oh, that was like I didn't know that. I'm like, wow, like this is so deeply rooted, So I thought it was a good touch of them to not say, like, they didn't go into detail on how he passed until the end. And then it all kind of like wrapped together with the story. But yeah, it was just so sad.
Yeah, I definitely think that was kind of them set, if you didn't know, at least kind of setting it up. And so they kind of give you some background information on Eddie. And so they also had somebody, a woman who was the wife of Don Curtis, Dottie Curtis, who says her husband met Eddie in 1952 and they became friends. And he was the promoter in Jacksonville and asked Eddie to join him. And she even says that the business will have another Eddie Graham, which I guess speaks to how he was in the business. And so Eddie was born Eddie Goss, and his career changed when he took the Graham last name from Dr. Jerry Graham. And Jim Cornette mentions he was the originator of the Graham dynasty, and he carried himself like a star and had the gift of gab. And then they showed some more footage of him from that time period. Um, so back then, especially in New York, for some reason, it said brother teams were kind of over at that time. And so if you look alike, you can say you were brothers. And so the Golden Graham brothers were born, and they were like a huge hit in New York, where they have even sold out MSG. And I think Jim said they might have made close to six figures in 50, which will be like about $1 million today, which I think, for that freaking solid. I mean, give me, you know, pretty wild if you just like, oh, you guys kind of like two white guys kind of look alike. Here we are, you guys are. But that's kind of what happened with the start of the tag team for them. And they also talk about this incident where so Dr. Graham was a bit of an alcoholic, and he had some mental health issues. He did cause a lot of trouble. He liked to go into bars, start people, and start fights. And there was a moment which I thought, I was like, all right, where they talked about the story with his mom, where his mom was in the hospital, and he told the doctors in Phoenix, Arizona, that she better come out alive, but she passed away. And so he returned to the hospital with a shotgun, 38 caliber revolver, and a 8-inch hunting knife. He goes to the ICU, he shoots a doctor, and then he grabs the stretcher with his mom, and they try to take him, and he throws his mother corpse and yelled, I just want to take her home and bury her. And this was literally like all of the first, after. And so I thought that was pretty insane, honestly. And I'm like, okay, I totally understand. It has to be a hard to do with your mom dying. My mom is still here, and so I don't know what that feels like. But I still think the fact that you went into not only a 12-gauge shotgun, you went in with a 38 and then a knife, which is like a whole bunch of nonsense. And I feel like would your mom been okay with you doing that? I feel like there's just, and I'm gonna have to just put this comment up because you are absolutely right. I do not know how he wasn't arrested, because that's insanity. I get that you was probably really close to your mom, and that's perfectly fine. And again, I don't understand that grief. I've lost people, but my mother is still here, so I don't know what that kind of grief is. But I feel like that's a bit excessive, and you're not gonna be shooting me, and then it's gonna be all regular, like you just walk out all regular. And so by this point, um, Eddie doesn't want to be partners with Jerry anymore, and he leaves New York and goes to Tampa, kind of where he settles. And he kind of, in Florida is where he was eventually one of the biggest stars ever in Florida, and was able to buy the territory over there. So before I continue, I guess, who are your thoughts on that?
My
We
jaw
do know
hit the
why.
floor. My jaw hit the floor. What? You did what? Did you see my tweet earlier? I was like, he did what? What is going on? You're talking about, oh, you couldn't be partners with him. So you went on and you partnered with him for a little bit before? That's like the last thing. You would have called me and told me that. I'm like, cool. I'm changing my number. What are you talking about? That you went back a few times? Oh no. That is something different. What you mean? It's illegal. Isn't tampering with a body isn't that illegal? What is going on? I was so confused. I'm like, huh? What? No, I couldn't even believe it. I was oh no. And then the lighting the cigars with $100 bills. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? What's going on with you? What is going on with you? That was interesting. I really was like, my jaw hit the floor. I said, what?
I mean, I'm not. Maybe it's because I'm like, I'm not rich, so I don't think I'll be burdened some hundred. Even if I was rich, I feel like I wouldn't be burdened nobody. And I do agree that there was definitely enabled behavior. But that's I can go into a whole detail about that. Thank you so much for hopping on. We appreciate you, and hopefully we'll catch you at next week's. But I can go into a whole nother thing about why, how enabling is actually like not good in situations like this. But we'll be here for a whole nother. We don't need to do that. But it was definitely a lot. And so next they speak to B. Brian Blair, who says he started wrestling in 1977 in Florida, and he talks about the Army in Tampa and how hot it was. And Nicole mentions, on Tuesday nights, that's when they would kind of give everything to become the big stars. And that's kind of how he became good, had good relations with Vince Sr. and Vince Jr. And so there's also some more about Jim Cornette kind of talking about, the rundown of NWA and how Eddie was the president of NWA twice, but also that Eddie was a violent person and did what he wanted. You either did what he wanted or you were out. And he wanted his wrestlers to kind of really do like some violent things and make people believe it. And said if his boys lost a fight to a mark, as he said, they were fired, as they always had to protect the business, and that they pretty much said it was kind of like a torture chamber in the torture chamber in the basement where they would kind of weed people out to be wrestlers. And then he said he was not really, Blair did say he wasn't so proud of some of the things he was asked to do. And they were even told to break people's bones during all of this. Another story, Sullivan told a story about some guy who was supposed to be booked for some shows and they're not sure how he got there. And so he was in a match and he was told to make him look good. And he said, if he doesn't come back bleeding, you are through, to Sullivan. And so he said, I kept my job. You bet I did. And he said that was one of the worst things that he did. Sullivan also says that Eddie was a go-getter and kind of expanded out of the business. He wanted to write checks instead of receive checks. He kind of got involved with charity in different parts of Florida. He helped raise the profile of amateur wrestling. It was like considered a rock star of the state. He even had some politicians in his pocket. And it was a big deal for them to be on FCW TV. And so I guess we there, because I feel like it got like more and more crazy. What are your thoughts about that? Because I was like, might be me, but
I gasped when they said the whole thing about that. Oh, he needs to be bleeding, or you won't have a job. What? That is very scary to me. Like it's never that serious. Like I understand, like wanting to protect the business, but like, honey, get some ketchup. Like, come on now, this is crazy. If you want to see some blood, like what? This is crazy. That just really, really threw me for a loop. And I feel like now, like wrestling is like this larger than life thing, and it's makes sense that he had all these people that idolize him, because even today, like they send belts to NBA, like playoffs when they win stuff. Like it's that important. Like wrestling is so like idolized, like, which is like, I feel like people don't talk about how idolized wrestling is by everyone else around it. Like it's something else, and I don't think it's changed from even back then, obviously. So I'm not surprised that he had all these people in his pocket. Like they probably was like, oh my god, it's my favorite. Like
But when you think of fans now, and let me be clear before something I say get misconstrued, because people don't know how to have comprehension skills. I always appreciate, because wrestling fans are who watches the shows, and so we appreciate that. But we all know there's those certain wrestling fans who take wrestling a little too seriously, and you would think that somebody then hurt their parents the way they be acting. They're a little too involved, where they get real offended with storylines. They get offended if you don't agree, and it's like, okay, relax. And so this was before we got a peek behind the curtain with social media and stuff. I can guarantee you it was a lot worse back then. And so I don't know. I just thought like half the stuff was absolutely insane. And I'm like, how is like y'all praising how good he was, and then he did all this stuff like that. I feel like that diminishes some of what he's done. It's no matter how good he was in the ring, because it's like you was a terrible person, like you was a terrible human being. I don't know how everybody was like, oh, he was so good, like so we all just not gonna question like all of this other stuff. I guess. And so they also talk about one of the main problems he had was alcohol. And there was a story that, and they wound up having an interview from his son Mike, where it was like he was drinking and taking his boat out, and his Mike thought then he was going to kill himself then, and so he took, Eddie took his bike, and was going to jump off a bridge on the boat, and he didn't make it in time. But if he did, he would have died. And so there was an interview, I think, from 2010 where Mike was talking, where he said Eddie was a lovable dad, but he was also very high demanding and put very high expectations on him, and that he was like always pressured, and there was a lot of scrutiny being Mike Graham because who his dad was. And then Jim kind of mentions that Mike was shorter and didn't have necessarily the personality like his dad, but he had the knowledge, and that he was a good worker, but and was in a lot of tag teams, and he never wanted to be the big star like his dad was. And then he said he blended in better, well with the boys, better than most people did. That was son to a promoter. And then they showed some more FCW footage, which I thought was pretty solid. And then Sullivan also said he was honored to be Mike's partner and his opponent, and that he was never going to back down and couldn't go home after getting his ass kicked. And it kind of said, Nicole talks about, her dad coming home bloody, sweaty, and smelling like alcohol, but that was a normal thing for them, which is also like, again, I'm not sure why that was such a normal thing. And then they explain again, FCW got Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Hulk Hogan, and that said that Dusty was like a surrogate son to the family, that Eddie took Dusty on his ring, and when Dusty kind of turned face, it set the territory on fire. And then there was, where things kind of start turning a little bit for Eddie, where it says he retired in his 50s and things kind of started really going down. He had 2 women he was torn between. There was some shady business partners, and then he was self-medicating, and also doing alcohol. And so like it was to the point where he'll get like cheap wine, after like almost every night when going home. And I think there was a story that was like there was one place he was said he was trying so desperate to get some one night that he found a bunch of used alcohol bottles in a nearby field and drank what he can get out of them. When that's like really really crazy. You think about it as far as alcoholism in that way, where you're drinking like used bottles to get just something out of that, which I seemed a bit much. And they said he was pretty much struggling, trying to find some meaning outside of the wrestling ring. And that even one time when Eddie went with his wife to the restaurant and nobody recognized him, he didn't know how to deal with that, and said he never really bounced back after that. And then one of the last checks he wrote to a liquor store, which was I think was $8, and he wrote "Peace of Mind." And so there was, I guess, where for him it shows Nicole was saying Eddie turned 55 years old, and she said, what did he get for his birthday? And he said he told her he got 55, and he said back 55 years. And she said then is when she realized that it would be over, then when she said looking back on it. And so unfortunately after that they showed an interview from Mike Graham saying from 2010 interview that it was the Super Bowl between Miami and the San Francisco 49ers, and he got a report page from the box office and said that his dad shot himself twice, and that the bedroom was a mess, obviously. And he said when he got to the hospital, he already knew his dad want him, to be in that condition. And so they pulled the plug and he died 5 minutes later. And so I was like, well, damn. Okay. And so, yeah, that, and I'm not laughing as in funny. I'm laughing like, damn, like you knew your father well enough that you knew he wouldn't want to be there because clearly he was sad. And then it's also sad, and I feel like I've said this before, the one thing I sometimes, which is why with anything athletic wise, again, it's like sometimes you get so wrapped up that you don't know what to do when it's over. And it's like, that's always a sad thing. And I am kind of glad even though the Undertaker had a lot to say about it, like wrestlers have other outlets. So like, or doing other things that they can do that's not just wrestling, because you can't wrestle to your 100 as much as Ric Flair would think he can. You cannot wrestle to the end. Wrestling will, unfortunately, any type of, things with sports or athletic, you can't really do that for the rest of your life, because you get older, your body changes, things don't work the same. And so that was pretty like, damn, like, wow. So what are your thoughts on that, I guess, leading up to that?
My heart really broke for his son, Mike, because I feel like he was spending so much time trying to live up to his expectations, and then for him to go out the way that he did, I couldn't imagine how traumatic that was for him, and then having to make that decision to pull the plug, and just seeing him, like the whole field thing, like that was like, I don't know how low you could possibly be mentally, like what you could be feeling in your heart to be in that position, to be in the field looking for any type of alcohol to just numb something. Like I can't imagine. And it was really sad. It's really sad on all points, like just thinking about what he was going through. And it said, yes, he did a lot of dirt, but it sucks. You never wish for someone to feel that low about themselves. And then just to get to that, it was I'm a little bit about that, because it's just like, you can't really, I don't agree with that at all. You don't know how someone's feeling in that moment. Till you are in someone's mind dealing with depression and those feelings, you cannot speak on it. You just cannot speak on that. Like, you just don't know. You don't know. It's so deep for some people. You just have no idea. It just, you don't have any idea. You really, really don't, because you don't know what you're. Okay, they stay around. What's staying around? Because they're slowly deteriorating that whole time. You're not thinking it all the way through. Like, there's so many parts. I get the part about family and leaving them behind, but I also get, if someone is that to that point, what are they like? Come on, But yeah, it's sad.
Yeah. Um. Yeah, I kind of 50 and 50 on that too, because again, I am a mom, and so I feel like I don't, I struggled with depression and anxiety and stuff, and so I don't think that's not something I can see myself doing. Not that it's something you just do regularly, but I mean, in regards to, usually if anybody gets to that point, it's usually that's a bad place to be in, I guess, when you get to a point that's the option. That's usually they're too far, and not saying people, because there's plenty of people who have attempted and they're fine now, and they're living now, but everybody is not the same in that regard, and so sometimes they think that's the option, and I don't know what it feels like to get to that place either, where
Yeah.
it's like you don't see any way out. But I also do think that this is why, and I say this specifically because I've heard this so many times with like the athletes, when it's like they can't play basketball anymore, they can't play football anymore, and it's like they're depressed, and it's like there's nothing else you want to do, or nothing else outside of that'll make you happy. And it's always a weird thing for me, because it's like, can we be to a place, where you find something that also gives you the same happiness, maybe not to the same exact level, but where you're not like, you don't know what to do with your life afterwards. So um and so they now talk mostly about Mike's taking over that territory after his dad died, but it kind of wasn't the same anymore. And it was also a little angle with the Freebirds, where they kind of dumped over Eddie Graham's legacy, and said Blair did say that he thought Eddie would have wanted him to do that, but Jim Cornette thought it was too far. And even after all of that, FCW did close their doors 2 years later, and this is also around the time where Dusty also left, and Vince was also, doing what he was doing with territories at the time, and so there was a lot happening back then. There was also saying that Eddie had a really good relationship with the McMahon, so it might have changed how anything was. And then they show some footage of Mike working in WCW where he was like, I guess, mentoring the young guys. And he said that's when he started feeling bitter because he felt like people didn't really know the business, was writing these stories of companies there, and he didn't particularly like that. And he said at the time, he was saying that you will sleep when you die. And it was mentioned about him having the tattoo Peace of Mind. I guess something about his reference to his dad, where a skull and some flames. His first tattoo he got at 40. And then he also started, drinking, where the drinking got worse after his father died. And, he had a license for, I guess, Mike Graham and Mike Gossip, which was kind of weird that he's able to get one like in regards to that. So he got a DUI during this and they suspended one and not the other, which I'm not sure how he was able to pull off 2 licenses. And then he started to kind of get tough with his son Steven and said he wanted him to be stronger and wanted him to be tough, and it mean he had to be mean and hurt him, which I thought that was kind of a weird thing to say to your kid, but I don't know. And so they show a picture of Nicole with her brothers, and that's when again, I feel like this episode did a lot of that, like kind of putting things in place for that reason. She said one morning she sent him a text and he didn't respond, so she thought he was working. And she was, I guess, wanted to check in and found out that Steven took his life. And I thought that was like, well, damn. Once again, she called Mike and told him not to come, and then said Mike told her that if he had Steven, they'd be burying both of them, as he would have taken his life right there. And so I don't know. I felt like Mike was dealing with whatever he was dealing with, he kind of took it out on his son, and I did, I feel like they're just the hurt, Blair saying he wasn't sure what demons, and I'm like, I don't know. I feel like this is clearly a family where a lot of stuff was happening. And then she also said that Eddie doing what he did kind of made suicide like an option, and that she like was more concerned about Mike after all of this. And so this was in 2010, and he said something about along the lines of, I must have been a shitty father and a shitty son. And I was like, oh, okay. Again, very like such a kind of a sad thing to say. And then Nicole starts talking about her own daughter and told Mike that this all ends with Steven, and saying, look at her, she doesn't deserve this. What your dad did was horrible. What Steven did, we're never going to recover from. And he agreed at the time, but unfortunately 2 years later, he also did the same. And so the story is Mike and his wife were in Daytona Beach for bike week, and she went to go see some friends. And when she came back, she heard a gunshot and Mike was dead, wearing Steven's cowboy boots. And, it kind of saying she had to pick up the pieces from her brother, and then also the situation with her dad. And so they even then go back further again, talking about Eddie's father who killed himself and Eddie's brother Skip who killed himself. And it's like, apparently this is like 4 or 5 generations of just family members, going out this way. And it's a heavy, I guess, Sullivan did say it was a heavy burden for Nicole and her daughter to carry. And then you see some, like at the end of it, Nicole kind of takes them to the old army. She shows like the wrestling history and all that stuff. And then she said this will always be the house championship wrestler from Florida built, and said she tries to focus on good times, remembers what her grandfather does with love, and her brother was her best friend. And that even though she had a tough relationship with her dad, there was still love and respect there, and that she missed pretty much all of them, and wish that they can see her daughter kind of grow up. And then Blair and Sullivan did said that they wish that they had more time with their friends and all of that. And then, she also got the Peace of Mind tattoo, which I'm not really sure I feel about them all getting the same tattoo. But yeah, that was kind of pretty much the end of the episode. I guess I was really sad, especially when it was like the whole family for the most part. And I truly hope that, you know, Nicole, at least nothing happens with her daughter, because apparently this is like a very deep family thing. But what were your thoughts about the rest and the end of the episode?
I thought it was really, really sad. I thought it was just a bad hand dealt to a family. Like, there were just so much irreversible pain there. And, sometimes when you're that deep down, you can't see another way out. Him wearing his son's boots, that tells you for 2 years that man was tormenting himself about the loss of his son to come to that point. You can't even imagine what the torment is to think about losing your child. Okay? And to say, like, be strong. Oh my God. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. Like, come on. It's so much deeper than that. I just feel like when it comes to depression, it's a very sensitive topic. You don't understand what someone's going through. You don't understand what someone can handle. Sometimes it's just too much, because you can have all these support systems. When you go to sleep at night, it's just you. And whatever's going on in your head is going on in your head. And sometimes it's too much. It's a lot of pain. It's a shame that it went through 4 generations. I hope that, I pray and hope that, the daughter, she breaks that cycle.
Yeah.
But they had pain. They couldn't find another way out. And I just really, I pray for that family. And it's just unfortunate what happened. A lot of people were failed in different ways, and they didn't see another way out. And I would never judge someone for dealing with that, because you don't know until you're in it. To be crawling into a field looking for the last little bits of bottles to drink, where do you think someone has to be mentally? You can't really talk if you haven't been that low. It's just, it's a sad situation, and I really do pray for that family.
Yeah. They do call alcoholism a disease for a reason. Like I said, I'm not really a drinker, so I don't, I might drink one drink here and there, and that's maybe I'm more of a juice kind of girl. But it's unfortunate. It kind of made me think of, you know, the other family with like Carrie and them, where it was like, goddamn, the whole family. Like, it's one of those situations where it's like, goddamn, the whole family have this kind of like, excuse me, the Ron Erics, because I forgot the last, just uh, the Ron Erics situation also was extremely sad when I watched that episode. Just because it was pretty much everybody but one. And that's in itself is just tragic. And so to have this being where it's like a grandfather, a father, a son, like all of that, it's a lot. I do, and again, I know a lot of people don't like therapy, and I say this, and it's not even me saying it dismissively because I see one, but I say this like sometimes, grief is a really weird thing. And I had to deal with that multiple times. And sometimes you need an outlet, and the outlet's not doing it by yourself. Sometimes you need extra assistance. And I get that, especially back then, you want to be strong and tough and manly men, and you don't think you need help. But I feel like that's nonsense, because clearly they did need help. And, I say this like for anybody who's actually watching this, like if you feel, you know, sad, or you feel like, that might be the answer, like please talk to somebody. And I know it's not always as easy as just saying something, and it sounds kind of like nothing when you're in that space, but most people want people to be here, want you to be here. So I feel like just find an outlet that's a healthy outlet, or talk to somebody, or see a therapist, or find something that makes you happy. And I feel like, at least, I feel like New York has it a little better with like certain things. You can talk to people a little bit easier now. But yeah, That's what I'm saying. Like, people are weird about mental health now, and it's 2023, and I'm like, depending on the race, mental health is a problem. It gets brought up depending on the race. I know what I'm talking about. Like, certain situations, well, the person's mentally ill, and it excuses bad behavior. And then sometimes it's like it's looked negatively, but I actually think if you can get a therapist, get one. Sometimes you don't even have to be anything super dire. Sometimes you just need somebody who's a unbiased person who's just kind of there to, shit happens and the world's crazy sometimes. And I like, in the wrestling situation, I'm not a wrestler, so I don't, and I damn sure wasn't in the business in the 80s, and I'm sure it was even worse back then. So I don't know what those parts are, but I'm hoping that we can get to a place at some point with mental health. I mean, it's a little better, but it's still very stigmatized, or it's used dismissively. Like, a person's like being a bitch one day, and it's like, oh, I'm bipolar. And I was like, let's not do. I'm always funny about that, because I'm like, if you're not diagnosed, don't say you have bipolar if you don't. I feel like that's something that really needs to be diagnosed, and so you shouldn't like just throw that out there. Or don't be like dismissive, because then it makes people who really are struggling like, okay, so I don't know, just if you're struggling, and it's just, again, anybody who's listening, just please reach out, because people want you here. But it was definitely just a really heavy situation. I was like, the whole, like, I think I didn't feel that sad since the Ron Erics, because that, like, I was like, damn, like, the whole family, it's like, what do you, like, the person who's left, it's like, what do you, like, that's a lot of trauma, that's a lot of like grieving, and it's, if you even probably ever get over it, because of the way everything happens, it's a very negative way. It's not like the person died of old age or they got sick. It was like more self-imposed. But yeah, that's the way it ended. Like I said, very unfortunate. I believe next week episode is on the original Doink the Clown. And so I'm not exactly sure. I don't really know too much. Like, I know there was different versions of that character, but I'm not really sure I know too much about the original one. And so I guess we'll see next week. And hopefully it's not as like sad as this week's episode. But everybody, thank you guys for who were watching with us, and sorry if it seemed really sad and depressing. The episode was, again, very heavy, so we apologize. We were just like recapping what happened. But yeah, I used to feel that way of telling people shit, and now my thing is, when I hear that you're a strong person, and maybe I am, I always say like, well, I say things to people now is because I had got through a lot, and usually by myself, and there's people like who needs whatever it is that I'm doing, and so I leave it at that. So it took me some time, but I feel like,
Yeah.
if a friend is your friend, they will understand and won't take it a personal slight as you're trying to bring them down too, because it's not meant for that. I mean, a good person, I hope. I don't speak for everybody. Well, I mean, hoping it's not like this, like, depressing. I feel like this was like mad, like, damn. If it's sad, like, as in like dark, like maybe he was like, I don't know.
I'm tore up. They tear me up back to back.
I can't. Yeah, I feel like some episodes you like got like it's a lot, but this is, yes, everybody doesn't have good relationships with their mom. I'm good with my mom, but I know everybody definitely does not have good relationships with their parents, and so I can't even say that's the. Yeah, yeah, I expect it to be somewhat dark. I just don't want it to be like, oh my god, like
I can't do that.
You don't want to be like.
I don't even drink. I swear, I was like, yo, I gotta go to the store. I gotta get me a cup, because like this was crazy. Yeah. It was too much. Yeah.
I felt like they set it up like the way I was like, all right, like, damn. Like I said, I knew like some of the story, because again, this is before my time. But before I started watching wrestling, but I didn't know to this extent. And so I'm like, hopefully, I'm, like I said, I am glad we got the Xavier Woods playing his video games, and whatever you need to do, if you're making your TikToks, whatever it is that keeps you somewhat outside of wrestling, do that. Talk to your loved ones, get some moments of peace, even if it's like blasting some music or something. Just, people are there for you. Please reach out. But yeah, Shay, tell everybody where they can find you and what you got going on.
That was so sad, and we just were like, well, anyway, you can find me at, and I'm kidding. Like,
I didn't know how to like transition into that because it was like really sad.
so where can we find you? Not kidding. You can find me at Shay Sawyer _ on most platforms. You can find me at Shay Sawyer, just Shay Sawyer on Twitch. I'm gonna try and get back into the grind on that. Cal, don't judge. And you can catch the Big Pop Theory podcast every Monday. This week we did not have an episode again because I said life be lifing, but we will be back with a new episode this coming Monday. And then you can catch me on Thursdays right back here with this pretty face for another sad review of Dark Side of the Ring. And for NXT as well at 7 p.m. on Women's Wrestling Talk, and 5 p.m. with Aisha Lomax and Lyric for Women's Wrestling Army. So yeah, it's a lot.
Just wanted to say I'm sorry. That sucks. That sucks.
I'm so
I'm sorry.
sorry.
My condolences to you. And I hope you keep pushing forward. As for me, I am on most social media and Cat We Trust, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, the E's the three. I did drop an interview earlier today on my channel with Journey Burke, who I thought, again, fascinating because I did want to do law at some point. I want to lock MF is up. But life was like, no, Katrina, that's not gonna happen for you. So let's slide on to a different career. And so she's a lawyer turned wrestler, which I thought was pretty, again, cool because that's one of the things I wanted to do at one point. I also did drop my review of Extraction 2. If you are a Chris Hemsworth fan, it is if you're still on Netflix. And people did leave because of their raggedy password sharing shenanigans that they want to try to act like we can't just be buddy and share passwords. But I watched it at a premiere, so I didn't watch it on Netflix. And so my review of that is up. I will be having some more reviews and more interviews dropping in the next couple of weeks because it's been lifing on my end as well, and I've been really busy. And I'm a mom and all that other stuff, so it gets a little hectic on my end. You can also catch me on Women's Wrestling Talk on Mondays for a while, and on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern for NXT with lovely, my the best duo ever with Shay doing NXT. And we will be back next week as well, 8:30, talking about Doink the Clown for next Dark Side of the Ring. Again, guys, we do appreciate you guys. Again, sorry that it seems so sad and so down, and that was not my intention, but the episode was sadder than last week's episode, and we did have to play catch up because I wasn't able to do it last week. But until next time, guys, and next week, we will see you here. Bye, guys.